Welcome to the Scale Ups podcast, where each week you get to hear Sean Steele, professional CEO, growth mentor, and advisory board chair, unpack the strategies that successful founders have used to achieve scale in their businesses. Stay tuned as he interviews the entrepreneurs who've made it, learns from industry experts, and follows a group of founders still striving to scale.
G'day everybody, and welcome to the Scale Ups podcast, where we unpack the secrets and strategies of scaling a business with the founders who've done it, the industry experts and advisors who can help on the journey, and where we follow a group of first-time founders on their journey as they strive to scale. We have got a very clear purpose here on the Scale Ups podcast, and that's to help out the first-time founders who've got, businesses sub $10 million in revenue, learn how to scale fundamentally so they can fulfill the potential of their business, make their decisions with more confidence, and in doing so, maximize the value they can create in the world. I'm your host, Sean Steele, and today I'm joined by Steve Grace, Director of Nudge Group. Nudge Group are building a pretty disruptive business in the recruitment space, focused on fast growth and startup companies, particularly those who need talent after they've raised capital in Series A and B or C rounds. Is that right, Steve?
That's right. Yeah, absolutely. And even a little earlier as well. We tend to try and help them when they're really early stage and they've got no idea what they're doing as well.
It's a beautiful stage. Well, welcome aboard. We're very much looking forward to hearing about your experiences and learnings as you've been scaling up. Just a little bit of context for our audience today. Originally we thought that you and I were chatting offline and thought we might be chatting about Ashdown, a talent management company that you'd scaled from 2 mil to 45 mil in revenue between 2010 and 2019, which of course is an incredible journey and would have had lots of lessons in it. But instead we're going to take a bit of a right-hand turn. Today we're going to talk about the Nudge Group, which you founded after the Ashdown journey. And from recollection, you kicked that off in 2019. Is that right?
So yeah, pretty much 2 and a bit years ago now. So just before we flew into COVID. I had a good 6 months before we flew into COVID.
Very short downtime to regroup. Well, look, from what we'd spoken about, the Nudge Group is actually growing materially faster in terms of run rate, but I also sense really sort of lights you up in a different way. Is that a fair comment?
Look, completely. It's growing. I mean, obviously Ashdown grew to 45 mil, so that was an amazing journey. But Nudge, 2 years old, Ashdown was probably 12 or 13 by then. The speed at which it's grown in the last 2 years is mind-blowing, far beyond anything I had really anticipated. And I think because I'm doing it quite differently, having had two businesses in the past that were very, very similar and scaling and selling both of them, to do something that's in the same industry but is really flipping the industry on its head has, I guess, the best way to describe it is reignited my passion for recruitment, God help me. I really wasn't, I wasn't sure if I wanted to go back into recruitment. I really wasn't. I was like, do I really want to go and do that again? But having had 6 months off, and coming up with a whole bunch of ridiculous ideas of businesses that I wanted to do that I really knew nothing about, you sort of come full circle and you realize that you have actually got an incredible skill set built over 20 years, and it would be a shame to sort of throw that out the window. But how can you do it differently? How can you take what you've learned and maybe apply it to an industry that hasn't changed at all for a very, very long time, and that's what we did, and we're still doing, and it's still evolving and changing, and that's what I think I love about it so much is it's in this constant state of change. So it very much ignited me again, as you can probably hear my voice.
I love it, and I think there's something really to that. Sometimes when people are making those transitions, whether it's from one business to a next business, or sometimes just people in their own careers, it's very easy to throw away significant networks, experience, insight that you have into industries. It's very easy to throw that away because there's a shiny ball that looks really fascinating that you have no idea about, but looks great. But actually, the one of the greatest ways to be able to create value quickly is, a space where where the gaps are.
Well, and so absolutely. I think you add more value, right, when you know what you're doing.
Yeah. Let's hope so. Well, look, maybe for the benefit of our audience, Steve, and for those who may not know you, can you give us a bit of an overview of the business, the genesis of it, the purpose and ambition, and I guess maybe an easy way for people to want to get their heads around is who's a typical client, what problem do they have, and how are you going about solving that?
Okay, cool. So I'll come to you about how I came up with the idea. I think with all my recruitment companies in the past, we've been very traditional in terms of dealing with government agencies and corporate clients and small and medium clients, but traditional companies, traditional recruitment. And towards the end of my journey with Ashdown was sort of the birth of a lot of the startup scale-ups. Atlassian floated. The companies like Canva and Safety Culture were really being born. And we started to work with them. And I loved them. I loved the concept. I loved the way they worked. I loved the way they thought. I loved the speed at which they grew. But as a company, we dealt with them badly. And that's not Ashdown. That's pretty much the industry. And the consultants didn't like working with startups for a number of reasons. And I don't think the startups liked working with us. So it happened as a more of a necessity. But it wasn't a marriage made in heaven. So when I was sitting in my couch trying to work out what I was going to do to turn the industry on its head, I thought, well, I need to specialize in something, and we'll come back to that later as to focus and how important that is. But I thought, well, I want to focus on this because I love startup founders. I love their unbridled optimism. I love the energy of it. I love beginning and starting companies myself. So I figured, why wouldn't I go and help other companies to do that? So that was what I came up with. And I thought, well, we need to look at the problems as to why people don't want to work with them and they don't want to work with us. And they were really quite simple. The first was very much payment. Recruitment is very expensive, as I'm sure you're aware. 15, 20 grand is your average sort of fee. If you're a startup, that's a lot of money. If you're hiring 5 people, it's a really lot of money. So that's the number one problem, and we addressed that. The other problem was that we tended to charge less. So if you take an average, just for the sake of argument, say it's 15% fee across the industry, we're probably charging startups 12%. And then you compound that with the fact that you tended to have more people drop out from a role in the first 6 months in startups, mainly because they didn't know what it was going to be like working for a startup. And I still think that's a massive problem. We do a lot of work around trying to educate people on that. So you had consultants going, well, why would I want to work a role with a guy who doesn't know what he wants? He hasn't got a job description. The chances of it dropping out are higher, so I'm going to have to replace it for free, and I'm going to get paid less to do it. The consultants going, I don't want to do it. So that compounded with startups going, well, they're putting the same people in front of me that they're putting in front of Combank. And that doesn't work because the person who's going to work in Combank is not going to work in a startup. So it just didn't really work. And when we did have success, it was more through luck than design. So that was the real problem that I felt existed. So when we created Nudge, we created some very simple changes. We deal with any company that's sort of seed level, 2-3 people, founders hiring their first person, all the way up through their seed round, all the way up through their series A, B, C, D. And I'm not sure if anyone understands that, but that's just levels of funding through venture capital firms, to even larger, more established companies that maybe private equity have bought and they're transforming them and changing them, to finally companies that are IPOing, so floating on the stock exchange. And we work anyone in that sort of journey. And the reason we've picked that is that's really where they're going through accelerated growth, which holds a lot of problems for people. Hiring a lot of people very quickly is a very difficult thing to get right. And typically, they didn't have very mature or well-established talent functions. So you had a lot of people doing the hiring who didn't really know what they were doing. And we felt that's where the biggest problem was. Now, as they do get bigger, they do tend to have talent functions now, but they still struggle because they're trying to hire so many people at once. So, and then the final route that it's gone now, and this is relatively new, I don't even know when we last spoke, Sean, but we're really doing a lot of helping them go global. So we've opened up an office in London, we're about to open one in Singapore, and we're about to open one in the US, and we've got roles in 9 different countries, right? And they're all Australian companies going off into 7 or 8, 9 countries at the same time. So now we're being that trusted partner so they know what they're getting when they go into a new country. Because again, that's quite difficult going to a new country. You don't have contacts, you don't know anybody, you don't know who to trust.
Yeah.
But we're going on that journey with them, so they've got a trusted partner. And at the same time, we're creating ecosystems in all of these countries of lawyers and accountants and marketing people, again, that understand the nuances of that space to help them grow. So it's becoming really, I'm not going to use the word partner because everybody says that word and I really hate it. I think we're really immersing ourselves in them and getting a lot more out of individual clients than having multiple clients and doing less with them, if that makes sense.
And those networks that you're talking about that you're sort of building in these new local ecosystems, that's a function of building your network out to enable you to succeed in recruiting the right roles, or actually to enable them to expand into the region?
Mainly to enable them to expand into the region. So,
awesome.
we offer a huge amount of ancillary services, we've got website Balance the Grind, we've got the Give It a Nudge show, and then we've got this ecosystem of partners. We do all of that for free and for nothing. And the idea of that is to really help them grow. And we just charge them for the recruitment. And it's just I'm trying not to use the word partner again. It's a real way of working together. It's an awful word. Everybody uses it. It's more overused than I think pivot.
Or journey.
Or journey, yes, journey.
Yeah. And so if there's quite a few things that you're really doing differently in that space. If you were going to summarize in a couple of bullet points, what are the big differentiators for you to anyone else? I know that there's probably not a myriad of firms actually working, that want to work in the startup, in the sort of early stage scale up sector, because they're more difficult, because of all the things that you explained earlier. But so in and around those people who are competing in a similar space, how would you summarize those kind of key differentiators?
That's a good question. Look, there's actually a lot of them in the UK and the US, I've noticed. There's not many here. There's a few here. I think we are almost like I guess when we were working with a company, we treat it like a campaign. So we have a number of different digital assets that we use. As you know, it's very difficult to hire people right now. And it's even more difficult if no one knows who you are. And that's the problem a lot of startups and scale-ups struggle with. So we create almost a media digital campaign around individuals and the company to create a sense of people wanting to work there because they're suddenly seeing it. It's that marketing trick. And look, I'm not a marketer. I've learned a lot about marketing in this company, which I never knew, and it's quite a fascinating subject. But if you see brands and you see recognition, you become more comfortable with it, and that's how big brands get you comfortable with their brands. So we took that principle and we said, okay, if we're going to work with a new company, say it's 20 people and they want to grow to 60. We'll start out by using a digital asset that we recently acquired called Balance the Grind, which is, I think it's the number one now, work-life balance website. And we will get key people within the business, the founders and maybe key other people on interviews, and we'll get them on that site. So we own that site now. So we'll do interviews with those people and then we'll promote them talking about how they balance their grind. And that's the start of it, right? We'll then get the founder on our video podcast, which I think you've seen, which is Give It a Nudge. And we'll get the founder to really tell that story. And that's really important because when you're hiring for startups and scale-ups, you've got to have people who understand the story, and that's another overused word, and align themselves to that story. So we have to be able to tell that, and we do that in a really high-quality video environment. We then use that video all over LinkedIn. We promote it on YouTube. We have subscribers. We have a big following now of people who are interested in startups. I think we've got 45,000 people following Nudge now after a couple of years, which is pretty good. And that grows. It grows every week. It amazes me. But and then we pump out loads of content about whatever it is they're doing as well. So you kind of have this media storm campaign leading up to when we start recruiting for them. And then when we start recruiting for them, we chop up lots of that little bits and we send it out when we're headhunting. So we might send video clips out when we're headhunting. We might send articles like Balance the Grind. So we have this huge amount and volume of information that we can pump out to individuals to really get them excited about the company before we've even really spoken to them. And I think it's that campaign management almost, and we do all of that for free, and we give them all of the content for free as well to use themselves. That is probably the most involved and different part that we do above any other recruiter. I think that would probably be the biggest change.
Yeah, that's amazing. And what a fascinating way to build an ecosystem around that proposition. I love that. So can you just give us a sense of growth? I mean, obviously this is a much earlier stage company than the last one, but you talked about the fact that it's probably growing faster than the last one. What would you use as metrics that might give people, give the audience a sense of the scale, whether that's acquisition of customers or employee numbers or revenue, or what metrics do you use to think about how fast the business is growing?
It's a good question too. I'll give you I've got lots, so I'll give you them all. And because it's only 2 years old, it's really easy. I know them all. So in the first year, I think we turned over $500,000 roughly, and that was the first 6 months of COVID and 6 months prior to that. So we're pretty happy with that. We made about a $60,000 loss. That was fine. This year, it's just gone, which of course is during COVID as well. We've turned over about 2.2 million, which is obviously 4 times the growth. We've made a profit of nearly 700,000, which is a lot more than we turned over the previous year, which is astounding.
Wow.
From a staff number point of view, we were 2 people in the first year. We're now 10, and we've got sort of 3 open roles. And obviously, we're operating in 8 different countries now, whereas before we were just operating in Sydney. And then if you think from a client acquisition point of view, we have brought on, I think it's somewhere between 80 and 90 new startups in the last 18 months as new clients. Now that is absolutely enormous. And when you think that nearly all of our clients hire somewhere between 10 and 30 people off us because they are growing so quickly, the volume of work that is coming out is incredible. And all of those clients have come through referral of some form. We haven't done any business development yet. And I think that really gives you an idea of the size of the market. And that's just Australian companies. I mean, obviously we're operating in other countries. We haven't even started to hit the startups in those countries yet. We're just helping these Australian ones grow into those countries. But that's obviously going to be a growth for us in the future. Now that growth is astronomical to me in a 12-month period in what is a very uncertain time. And it seems to be accelerating. I would imagine we will grow as fast, if not faster, this year. So I'm just sort of holding on at the moment. But it's the fastest growing business I've had, I think, in such a short space of time.
Amazing.
Yeah,
amazing.
Crazy.
Well, can we talk a bit about the strategy side then? Some of those kind of key things. We've talked a lot about the value proposition and the elements of differentiation, but I'm interested in a couple of the, what might be some of the key things that change the dial on growth. So the first question would be, did you actually set out to scale from day one? Like, when you started this company, were you starting in your mind with the intention of scale, or was that sort of an afterthought? You wanted to just focus on solving a problem, and if scale comes, then great. How did you think about it?
Yeah, far more the latter. I didn't really have a plan. And I don't mean that sounds terrible. I wanted to solve that problem of startups. I wanted to see how it was going to go. I wanted to see if there was a genuine market there and whether there was actually a business. So I certainly didn't have dreams of going global. I certainly didn't have dreams of hiring that many people in the first 2 years. So no, that has very much evolved. From a strategy point of view, and I think this is really important, particularly for your audience. I'm very much a doer. I like doing. I'm not a sort of thinker, if you like. But you have a strategy, and it almost has to evolve monthly when you're in a business at this stage. Sitting down and creating a 3-year strategy is absolute lunacy at this stage of a business, in my opinion, because you have to, I'm not going to use the P word, but you have to change so often. The market changes on you. COVID came. I mean, goodness, who saw that? There's so many things that change. There's so many ideas that come to you. Your offering will change as well. It will evolve. We had so many other products that I spent months coming up with that no one had any interest. I thought they were genius, right? No one cared. So we dropped them all and we stuck with the ones that they do. So this kind of stuff happens very, very frequently when you're growing. And even in the last 6 months, our strategy has changed drastically to where it was 6 months ago. And it evolves mainly at night when I'm exhausted and I start thinking about things. But I think, yes, you have a strategy and yes, you have to execute on it, but you also have to be prepared to throw it out the window at any point when you're in that maybe not pre-10 mil, but pre-5 mil. And then as you get more established, then yes, the strategy has to become a little bit more firmer. But again, it still has to be incredibly fluid, I think.
Couldn't agree with you more. And so when you think back now on the last couple of years, what are maybe, one or two of those key decisions when you look back now and go, actually, that was a really important decision because that unlocked X, Y, Z that's really helped us on the scaling side. What are one of two of those moments?
I think there were two things probably that have made a really big impact. When we first started, I had it in my head that we were going to go to all the venture capital firms and all the private equity firms. And they were going to go, hallelujah, someone's here to help us make money. And they were going to give me access to all those portfolio companies. Well, that didn't happen at all. They couldn't understand what I was offering them. They thought I wanted funding myself. It was futile. So we changed that strategy entirely and we just started focusing on founders. And that's when we came up with the balance the grind, the give it a nudge and all that stuff, because that was never in the original focus. And we thought, right, what we've got to do is we've actually got to help these companies create a voice. So that show and that media storm that we create was an absolute game changer. And, we have a waiting list to go on that show now. Companies that I never thought would sort of easily come on board, and I didn't necessarily want a business development because they were so high profile. I assumed they had lots of recruiters already, have come to us and asked to work with us. So that media thing was absolutely a game changer. I think the other thing was the decision to go global. So we opened London nearly 12 months ago now, last September. Again, not something I only had 2 staff, I think, when we started thinking about this. I mean, who thinks about going global when you've got 2 staff? But that decision, because there were so many companies that were at sort of Series C that were going, oh, we want to launch into Singapore, we want to launch into London. And I'm like, and they're like, do you know any recruiters that do what you do over there? And I was thinking, well, we probably could find them, but why don't we do it? You know, we're in this remote world, and I think COVID has changed a lot of people's belief about what you can achieve from your home office. Why don't we do it? And that really, I guess, embeds you in the client, because you're part of their growth strategy to such a key point that you become truly embedded within them. Makes you, as they like to call it, makes you very sticky with your client, right? And you're getting the dream, right? Which is getting more revenue or more sales out of the clients that you have, rather than having to go and acquire new ones, which is always a more difficult task. So definitely the global thing and the media thing are the 2 biggest, and then both massive changes in 2 years.
Yeah.
So and neither of them were planned at all. They sort of came to me or came to someone in the team.
Evolved and tested and worked. So that's incredible. And I couldn't agree more. You know, the earlier the stage of the business, it's helpful to know it's really valuable to have an idea of where you want to go, but that level of adaptation and willingness to drop things and try something else is critical. And then obviously the larger the business gets, the more it tends to naturally stabilize. And that's because of the momentum that's building off the back of those decisions that happened early on, and those sort of mini adaptations, for want of a better word. Have you had to take on any, or do you expect to take on any external capital to fund your growth, given how quickly you're growing?
So I was chatting about this yesterday. I was doing one of my COVID walks with a friend of mine who actually is a venture capitalist. And I was approached maybe 11 months ago by a firm that specializes in private equity within recruitment companies. And at the time, I was at that really awful time where we had no money because we were going through immense growth, and the profit was great, but there was no cash in the bank. The cash flow was just shocking. And it was hindering my ability to grow. And I'd already put quite a lot of my own money in, and I wasn't really keen to put a lot more in because we were in COVID and I was a little worried about the future and all these sorts of things. So it was quite appealing when they first approached me. And we had a number of meetings, and I really sort of sat around and thought about it. And in the end, I decided not to. And there's 2 reasons I decided not to, and that was the best decision I made, because we don't need it now, and you know we've ended up making more profit than they were going to invest in us. So that would have been crazy. But the reason I said no is I don't necessarily think services businesses should take funding. I think in a product-based business, it makes a lot of sense because it's very expensive to build product, and I understand why that VC journey exists. But I think in services, there's ways around it. We came up with some very creative solutions to solve the cash flow. You know, I went and approached a number of different finance companies and said, you need to build a product for me. And they're looking at me going, why do I need to build a product for a strange man with a tiny company that I've never heard of? And most of them tell me to get lost. But eventually we found one that said, yeah, okay, we can do this. And they did. They created a bespoke product for us. And that actually got us through that period. But it's very, very tempting. But I decided not to, because I also didn't want to have to answer to someone else. I know one of the questions you will probably talk about at some stage is mistakes, because it's inevitable. And we can touch on why I didn't want to give or get anyone else involved in the business. And it's a learning from some of the mistakes I've had. And it just didn't feel right. And I'm really glad that I didn't. I could still do it now. You know, it's still tempting now to go and say, right, I could probably raise money far easier now because we've got money, and that's always the way it is, and really scale quickly. But I just think for services businesses, if you do that and you scale that quickly in services, you often lose the service because you can't maintain the quality of service when you scale that quickly in a services business. Like I said, product's very different because you're building a product, the product does something, it does it every time. Services, you rely on people, and to get people to do everything the way you want them to, you need systems and processes. And if you scale too quickly, inevitably, and I've had it happen to me, that falters, and then it hurts your brand, and then you're on that bad sort of spiral. So those were the 2 reasons why we didn't do that. But it's a very tempting decision when someone starts offering you money. I agree.
Yep, absolutely. Absolutely. Well, when you think about your journey, no journey is clearly possible without people, particularly in a services organization. And those people are both you personally, your leadership, how you show up, as well as the key people and the key supporters that have supported you on your journey. From a personal perspective, as a CEO, sometimes we're often faced with having to have in an environment that's uncertain, having to have an unshakable conviction that we're going to succeed, but also retaining at the same time the flexibility, the ability to adapt, the humility to be wrong. How have you experienced that, and how do you try to strike a balance?
That's a difficult question. I think the ability to admit you're wrong comes with time. I don't think anyone of a certain age is particularly great at that. I don't think anyone's born with that skill. That is something that comes through experience. That doesn't mean you have to run a business to have learned that. But I think, for example, all those wonderful ideas I had about products and services that I wanted to create, I had to throw those away. It's very hard to do that, right? When you put a lot of time and effort in. And admitting you're wrong about things is always difficult, but it's probably the most important skill in scaling a business, because you will be wrong. There's no question you will be wrong about things. And I think having that, and it's very difficult when you're in this fast growth environment, having the time to sit there and let things sit with you and then understand that you're wrong is probably the best way of doing that, because your instant reaction is always, I'm not wrong. Well, that's mine anyway. So it takes time for me to think about something and admit I'm wrong. So I think it's very important that you give yourself that time each week to think about the things that perhaps haven't gone well, and have they not gone well because you're wrong, or have they not gone well because they just haven't gone well, which, and either's possible, but you need time to actually work that out. That's a really important thing that I think every founder should try and do. And time is, of course, your greatest asset when you're a founder, and also your shortest thing that you have. I think. Well, sorry. What else was? Remind me of the question. What else did you want to know? So there was the admitting you're wrong, and
I guess I might actually switch to another question, because I've got so many questions I'd love to ask you. I know that we don't have unlimited times. Let's actually switch from you to other people that have perhaps made a difference to your success in the company.
Sure.
What advice have you received along the way that's maybe really influenced the way you lead, or how you built the organization, and who's given you that advice?
So I saw this question on your prep sheet, and I thought long and hard about this today. And I've been asked this question before in a slightly different format. I was asked about mentors. I've never had a mentor, and it pains me. I really would like one. If there's anyone out there, please call me. I really would like one. And it's not, I was trying to work out whether it's because I'm difficult to work with, whether I'm unwilling to accept advice or any of that sort of thing. And I don't think it is. I get a lot of the advice from my staff and my team. I'm extremely lucky at Nudge in that every single person that works for me, even the guys in the UK, have worked for me in one of my businesses currently. Now, that won't be able to maintain that forever, unfortunately, but having had two businesses over 15 years, I've had a lot of recruiters come and go, and I've been lucky enough to be able to pick and choose the ones who wanted to come on this journey, and they've come on this journey. So I have a lot of trust in them, and I ask a lot of their opinions. There are obviously people I ask different things for. Other than that, I have a lawyer who I talk to a lot, he's a corporate and commercial lawyer, and he's also a friend. He gives me a lot of advice on things that I'm not great at. I have accountants that I trust, and those kinds of people that really help me make decisions. I'm not particularly what I would say financially literate. When I put it this way, when I was managing the accounting for Nudge at the beginning, we never had any money. As soon as I outsourced it, we seemed to have money everywhere. So I don't even understand how that works. But so it really annoys me as well, because I don't understand it. But so having those people that can do the things that you're bad at, I'm highly dyslexic. So attention to detail, legal matters, accounting matters, nightmare. In terms of other kind of mentors, I'm a member of a club called Club of United Business, which exists in Sydney and Melbourne. People may well know it. I was one of the very early founding members 5 years ago, and it's entrepreneurs, and it's typically younger entrepreneurs building businesses, just to have a place and a club of people where you can talk to. And I have developed probably 10 or 15 quite close friends out of that who all run their own businesses, and I talk to them a lot as well. So that's, I say I haven't had a mentor in the traditional sense, but Cub has probably become my group of mentors. It's been an amazing journey, and 5 years member, and I will continue that. And the club has changed so many ways. And I've used the club in different ways. I was running Ashdown, which was turning over 45 mil when I joined. Then I didn't work for a year, and then I had Nudge. So I've had a lot of life changes during my time there, and I've had a lot of advice from people just in businesses, not relating to recruitment at all. And I think that's good. Just having a network of people who kind of get what you're going through is incredibly helpful. So that would be probably where I've got most of my advice.
Yep, I like that.
And of course, the wife. And don't ever forget the wife, right?
Okay, well, we'll make sure that does not get edited out. We'll actually put it right up the front. That is the right answer. And, I find that quite often there's almost virtual mentors when you think about, the books you've read or the stories that you've heard from someone. They may not be in your life all the time. Sometimes those things stick with you. But to your point, good advice or additional perspective or questions for you to chew on can come from anywhere. And the question, of course, is which are the ones that really sort of have the biggest impact. And you've mentioned some of those today. You talked, you sort of alluded briefly before to, the sort of the world of mistakes, the fails or the near misses or the catastrophes that we've had along, and anyone who's of our age and built numerous businesses has got plenty of these.
Yep.
But I'm interested from two perspectives. What's one of the most challenging times that you've been through, and what did you learn from that? But also, who did you lean on to get through that period from a personal perspective, and what did they sort of do or say that made a difference? So one is like what happened, what was the learning? The other side is who else was there, because those tough times can be incredibly difficult as a founder, and you're often wearing that burden on your own shoulders.
No, I agree with that. I'm going to quickly give you the three things that I think are my biggest mistakes, and then I'm going to go on to your question, because I think there's some very key things that I think everybody makes. The first is taking on too much work. And, there are times when you do. Last night, I worked a ridiculous day. But doing that for too long and not effectively enough, and not looking after yourself, not having enough exercise is very bad as a founder. So you have to control that. Second is not building process, because then you can't scale. So those are the two things that I think everybody makes. Business partners for me have been a struggle. They've been a joy and a struggle. Let's put it that way. Having business partners is very difficult. It's incredibly helpful at the beginning because it gives you a sense of comfort. It gives you someone to talk to and so forth. But inevitably, with both of my previous businesses, the reasons I'm not in those businesses anymore is because the relationship between us broke down. And it didn't break down because one of us was a difficult person, or it broke down because as your business succeeds more, you're not the same person, and you have different views on different risk profiles and sometimes different stages of life. So my first business partner was quite a bit older than me. So what he wanted out of the business from a lifestyle point of view, from a financial point of view, from a risk point of view, was very different to me. And that became a problem. The other one, the irony of the other one was that I tried to pick someone who was the opposite of me, because that's what everyone says to do. But then you reach a point where you just don't agree on anything. And that was probably in business, that was the hardest time for me. That combined with the first GFC, when I had to make 20 people redundant, and that was the worst thing I've ever had to do in my life. I hadn't been a CEO long, and it was really, I had to let people go through no fault of their own, and that was very, very hard. And I leaned on my business partner then, because that was my first business, and we were still quite early on in our journey. So that was okay. But the second one, when I split up from Ashdown, and I use the word split up because it was a little like a divorce. My business partner, Mark, and I had known each other in London. We'd known each other for 20 years. We had been best man in each other's weddings. Our kids were the same age. We were in a relationship for all intents and purposes. But towards the end, and I ended up selling my share of the business to him, the relationship broke down completely. And unfortunately, we don't speak particularly favorably of each other now, or maybe that's not true. We just don't speak, I think, is probably the better way. And it was like getting divorced from marriage. And I found it took a huge emotional toll on me, and it was no one's fault. We just had very different views on what we wanted to do with the business and where we wanted to go and how much risk we wanted to take. And it was unresolvable. And unfortunately, I had to leave that business. That was really, really difficult. I lean predominantly on my wife, to be honest. My wife is an incredibly strong lady. She's also she's got a very kind nature to her, and that's what you need when you're going through that kind of emotional toll. I also lost my mother at the same time to cancer, so it was like a shocker of a year. So I leaned on her a lot, and then actually, ironically, my lawyer is a very close friend of mine, so I leaned on him a lot. And being a lawyer, he's very matter of fact and practical and brutal, and sometimes you need that as well. So having two people, one who's very understanding and kind, and then having someone who's here who's just almost unempathetic and brutal, having the combination of those two kind of keeps you on the straight and narrow. It's like there's one's knocking you that way and the other one's knocking that way and that way, and it keeps you going. So, but it was awful. It was an awful time, and it was not an enjoyable time. And I would say that exiting any business is difficult. Even if you get paid out. When we sold the first one, we both sold our business to a listed company and we got paid. That was difficult. But going through that kind of divorce of a person is incredibly, incredibly difficult. So choose your business partners well. There are no business partners in Nudge. And again, this was why I probably turned down that money. The thought of having another business partner, even if they were a minority shareholder, terrified me. We have an employee share plan, and all employees get equity within the business, but that's quite different. And I think that's probably the biggest learning I got from that, is that I've done this for 15 years, albeit with different partners. I don't need anyone else. I know what I'm doing. I need to do it my way, and I want to do it my way, and I want to know if I can do it my way. That's the other thing. You never really know when you have business partners, why are we successful? Is it me or is it him or is it both of us? That's always in your head, as I'm sure, where imposter syndrome sits with every founder, no matter how much success you have, and it's always popping its head up. And when you're not the one running it, you never really know if it was you or it was the other guy. So those are probably the two.
When you think back on that experience, though, do you think, with the benefit of hindsight, is there something that you could have done or didn't do early on in the relationship that would have made it more likely that it would have succeeded? Or actually fundamentally, was it just sort of, wrong choice of partner? There's nothing I could have done. It probably wouldn't have worked anyway. Like, what do you think about that? It
wasn't wrong choice of partner. I mean, we had phenomenal success and we had a lot of fun. So it was a good time. We built a very good business and we enjoyed it. And it was very rewarding in so many different ways. I think about 18 months prior, I was going to leave the business because I could almost see it coming. And we sat down and we talked about it and we were going to do it and we'd agreed a price and it was all friendly and happy and everyone was going to be okay. And that would have, I should have left then at that point, and we wouldn't have lost our personal relationship, which is sad that we have. Our kids unfortunately don't talk anymore and our wives don't talk anymore. And, so we've lost that part of our lives. If I had left that 18 months prior when I planned, we wouldn't have had this situation. Unfortunately, for some bizarre reason, I decided to stay, and we were literally at the point where we were about to agree the split, and he said, "Oh, why don't you just stay?" And then I don't know. I said, "Oh," we talked about it for about an hour, and then I ended up saying, "Yeah," and we hugged, and I stayed, and that was the worst decision I ever made, and he would probably agree. So yes, I think my gut at that time told me to leave, and I should have done that, and I think gut feel is a fascinating, I'm really find it one of the most interesting things. It's very important in recruitment, very, very important in recruitment. I always push candidates to make a decision based on their gut, even if it's not my role they choose to take. I think it's so important. And there's books on it. I don't know if you've ever read Blink. Blink's a fascinating book that kind of talks about that. That's a great book for anyone to read. And it talks about when you should use your gut and when you should use your head and the differences. I think gut is, I don't know what it is. I don't know how it works. And I've tried to learn and I still don't know. But I think it's a really, really important thing that people need to listen to more. We could have avoided all of that. But hey, you learn, live and learn. That's you're only where you are today because of everything you've done in the past, right? So
that's right. It's the sort of sum total of all of your conscious and your unconscious decisions that got you to where you are today. So you can't sort of love part of it and actually hate the rest of it, because all of it's been influential. All of it's sort of led you to where you are.
You have to remember,
which is the great. That means that includes the luck, and it also includes the stuff that you did that that you got wrong, and it also includes the the stuff that actually you did just purely on intuition that sort of led you to where you are today.
Yeah.
When you think about, if we take a step back and think about forward looking, What's in store for the next 3 years? What do you hope the organization looks like in 3 years? And I know that's actually a really long time away, given the company's 2 years old, and actually where it is today versus 2 years ago where you thought it was going to be was probably entirely different. On today's basis, and we can use this as a bit of a timestamp, for the future. What do you think the business is going to look like? Maybe I'll give you 18 months rather than 3 years if that's easier. But where do you think it's going to be heading, and what are the big priorities for you?
Yeah, look, I actually have a really clear picture now. Now, if you ask me again in 6 months, it'll probably be different. But right now, I have a very clear vision of what I want it to be. We have this office in Sydney. We are building this office in London. We've got 2 people there currently. I'm literally about to open Singapore in October. So what are we now? We're August. Or are we July? No, we're July. See, this is lockdown for you. You don't know where you are. So Singapore is planned for October. And then the US is planned for probably March, Easter time. And that now, where I go in the US, we're still debating, but it's most likely going to be either Santa Monica, Austin, or New York. We'll come to that later. That's too much headspace to think about that now. But it's having these 4 hubs. And the reason those 4 hubs are, it covers all the time zones. It's where most of the companies we're working with want to expand into. And once we have those 4 hubs, I want them to almost be carbon copies of each other. And what I mean by that is I want to have a space. We currently hire a television studio to record Give It a Nudge. I want each office to have a section for our recruiters. I want it to have a studio within it, and I want it to have a co-working space for the early stage startups. So we often, as I said before, take equity in startups rather than payment. I want those guys to have an office space that they can use for free for us. So it's creating an ecosystem, and I want to have one of those in each country. And I would envisage it would sit around the 40 to 50 staff mark. And when we've got that, then we'll work out where the hell we go from there. But that's kind of where my head is leaning to and how I see it today. And I communicate this to the staff pretty regularly. We have a weekly catch up because there's some of us team are remote in different countries. We have a Zoom catch up every week where we don't talk about anything. We just talk rubbish. And that's really good. That's really important. And then once a month, I have a monthly meeting where we also Zoom people who are overseas in, but we all come together. And really the purpose of that is we talk about things like, the values that we have that we created together. Are we actually doing them? Are they right? Are they wrong? We talk about any interesting stories or problems, and I talk about the future and things that are happening. So, where we're going with Give It a Nudge, who the guests are that are coming on, the purchasing of Balance to Grind, that kind of stuff. And then I communicate where I see the vision. And it does change month to month, maybe not quite drastically, but I want to make sure that everyone can see what's inside my head at all times, because then we're moving as one business rather than as me thinking about it and them doing something else. And I think that's really important.
I think that's incredibly important. I mean, in the context of scaling an organization rather than just through the personal effort of the founder, the only way that can happen as the organization gets bigger is actually alignment between people's priorities and the priorities of the company. And actually, if everybody else is just doing the best they can within the realms of a sort of job description kind of thing, well, this is the things that I was responsible for. It's like, hang on a second, this is actually about direction, especially at this stage of the company when everybody aligned and understanding their role in it. And it allows you that frequency of communication. I think really allows you that opportunity to tell them when it's changing and that they are sort of signed up for that journey. It's like, hey, we might think it's this today, might think it's something different tomorrow. The point is that actually you're on the journey with us, and people care about feeling part of something. So it builds that sort of sense of tribe.
And I think opportunities come from that. If they know we're going to expand into the US, they might have a conversation with someone that they wouldn't have had that might lend it to happening quicker, or a new client or whatever. So you want them to, when they're talking to clients and candidates, to be able to say, this is where the company's going. I know exactly what Steve knows. So they're not relying on me to be out there being an ambassador, so to speak. They are all ambassadors at the same time. And the only way, I think that's probably another big thing that I have very much learned over the years of running businesses. You need to communicate, and everyone says that, but you do, and you need to structure it into your time so it happens, and you need to be very honest, and you need to communicate everything. And they need to know what's expected of them. If people don't know what's expected of them, they don't feel a sense of purpose, they don't enjoy their job. If they know what's expected of them, then they can do it. And everyone gets a sense of joy out of doing something that they know they were supposed to do. I don't care who you are. That and the ability to have an impact on a business by knowing where you're going and being able to suggest things, those two things keep people very, very engaged.
I love it. Thanks, Steve. I have got a question I'd like to ask you, and I ask everybody, every guest I'll be asking this question, but the segment is called Above All Else. So I want you to imagine for a moment that you're in your sort of yearning years. You know, you've achieved all that you wanted in your business career. You've created value in the world. You've created the businesses you wanted to create. You sort of had a stab at everything that you felt like you had energy for, and you still got a whole wealth of wisdom, in that incredible mind of yours. And one day you get a call from the CEO of the largest global community of first-time founders. There's tens of millions of these hungry, curious individuals who are just trying to break through that 10 mil level or the 20 people level, or something where they're trying to get a bit build their company into something that's scaling a bit more, create more value in the world, serve more people. And the CEO, she offers you a single once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to share your wisdom with those small business owners around the world. And she asks you for your 3 above all else's. She asks you to finish this sentence. Above all else, the 3 things you must get right as a founder if you want to scale are? What would your 3 above all else's be?
I'm sure this question wasn't on the prep sheet. The first one is something that I've only adopted recently, and I think has had probably the most profound effect on me in years. And that's do something that scares yourself. What I mean by that is it's the self-belief, and we talked about imposter syndrome briefly, is a big, big problem. So you've got to do something that you don't want to do and that you're scared to do, because as you start to do it, it makes you believe in yourself a lot more. I started doing kite surfing, which terrifies me, and I'm still trying to do it, right? But I don't know why, but it gives you belief in yourself. So I think that's the first one is definitely keep doing things that scare you, because that will help you overcome obstacles. The second would be make sure you're really, I'm trying to think of the right word, engaged with your team. And I mean, no management, it's all about leadership. I really do believe that. And I think that's the other thing that is often done incorrectly. And I mean everyone in the business, not just your top layer of management as it grows. 3 things, one more thing. Above all else, look after your health. And again, I think, I've recently joined a new gym that is very tailored to me specifically and my needs. And I know that if I keep my fitness up, I just feel better and I feel more positive and I feel like I can overcome things more than if I don't. If I'm working too hard and I'm sitting here and I'm working till all hours and drinking red wine, there's times for that. But if you do too much of that, you actually become less productive. So looking after yourself, scare yourself, and make sure you're a leader, not a manager.
Beautiful. I really appreciate that, Steve. Steve, I'd really like to acknowledge you today for the tenacity that you've shown in this business, and also the humility. I love the fact that that you're willing to talk about the fact, actually I'm not a numbers guy. I don't need to be a numbers guy, and I've done a good job in being aware of my strengths and my limitations and surrounding myself with people that can do it. I also really love the fact that you are tackling this in such a different way, with really, you can get a sense of the sort of care for the customer and the care for your founders at the center. And that's why that ecosystem is being built in a certain way. Yes, it makes sense from a business perspective, but fundamentally you really care about them actually being able to succeed. And you can see that come through in the way that you're building your strategy. So I'd like to acknowledge you for that. Can I ask a question? How do people get in contact with you? What are the sort of social handles or websites? How do people get in contact with you and learn a bit more about the Nudge Group if they're interested?
So LinkedIn's always the easiest, most universal way. Obviously, Steve Grace, the Nudge Group on there. My email is the most obvious email in the world. It's steve@thenudgegroup.com. Those are probably the two easiest ways. The website is thenudgegroup.com. So it's all very easy. As long as you can remember the Nudge Group, you'll be able to find me without any difficulty whatsoever. We're also building a new website, and that will be launching in about 2 months. And on there is going to be a section where you can just book yourself into my calendar for half an hour. Anyone can do that to have a chat to me, and I'm trying to do that to make myself a bit more available. So if you can wait a couple of months, you can just book in the calendar without even asking me as well. So that's going to be, I'm looking forward to that.
Yeah, it's very handy way to get the live diaries happening. Well, I really appreciate your time today, Steve. Thanks so much. And folks, I hope you've enjoyed the show today. Big thanks to guest Steve Grace from the Nudge Group. Make sure you check out his website and his socials. Links, anything that we've talked about today, of course, will be in the show notes. Check out the show notes online. And remember that the only thing that assures failure when you're attempting to scale is giving up in the first place. So believe in yourself. Stay unshakable in the belief that you're going to get there, but flexible in your approach. You've been listening to Scale Out's podcast. I'm Sean Steele, and I look forward to speaking with you next time. Thanks very much, and thanks, Steve Grace.
Thanks, Sean.
G'day everyone, just a couple of quick things before you go. If you have questions that you'd love myself or an upcoming guest to tackle about challenges that you're facing in scaling your business, please just jump straight on the website, scaleupspodcast.com. You can record your message straight from your mobile by hitting the button on the right-hand side of the page, or you can just email them the old-fashioned way, questions@scaleupspodcast.com. And just a quick reminder, nothing we spoke about today constitutes financial or business advice. If you are considering making big decisions in your business, seek out a professional who can look at your situation in detail and make sure you're getting sound, personalised advice. Thanks for listening. Look forward to being back in your podcast feed next week.